Good day, I am Jasper Diggs, and today we shall speak of things that lie forgotten in the deepest corner of your kitchen cupboard. Ordinary black pepper, cloves, cinnamon. Today you carelessly sprinkle them into your morning latte. But 500 years ago, for that very latte, you would have been murdered. In all of human history, there has never been a commodity more soaked in blood. Welcome to a world where a human life was worthless than a pinch of nutmeg. But before we set off on our journey, let us first address one stubborn misconception. If you open a school textbook, you will read the following. Spices were used by ancient peoples to mask the taste of rotten meat. Sounds logical, does it not? It is complete nonsense. Think about it for a moment. In the early Middle Ages, 1 pound of pepper could at times cost as much as a cow. A man wealthy enough to season his supper with a nutmeg could easily afford an entire herd of fresh oxen. Masking spoiled meat with pepper would be like drizzling truffle oil over an expired sausage today. Absurd. And the poor people who really did eat questionable meat, they didn't have any spices at all. They made do with salt, vinegar, smoke, and onions. So why would they go to war over spices? The answer is much more interesting. Spices were a symbol of status. Let's take a look at the surviving cookbook of Apicius, a Roman chef who lived in the 1st century. One of the recipes: boil cucumbers with a sauce of pepper, mint, and honey. Apricots and melons are boiled and then generously sprinkled with black pepper. Why? Not for taste. To show guests that the host is so obscenely rich that he can waste precious imported spices on fruit. It's like sprinkling pizza with edible gold. Expensive, questionable in terms of taste, but everyone envies. And it is this very envy, my dear friends, that will soon plunge half the world into war. When the Western Roman Empire fell, trade with the East became, for Europe, a costly nightmare. Spices still flowed in, but now through dozens of middlemen, from Indian peasants to Arab merchants, from the Arabs to the Byzantines, from the Byzantines to the Venetians, and only then onto the supper table of some count in Burgundy. By the time a sack of pepper reached the European market, its price had grown 1,000-fold. That is not a figure of speech. Those are real numbers from Venetian trade ledgers. And here is where it becomes truly amusing. Arab merchants, in order to protect their monopoly and justify these astronomical prices, invented for the gullible Europeans utterly deranged fairy tales. The cinnamon legend, for instance, was first conceived in antiquity, recorded by Herodotus himself. But in the Middle Ages, it was retold with particular inspiration. It went something like this. Cinnamon, they claimed, does not grow on a tree. No, it grows in the nests of giant man-eating birds, perched atop unreachable cliffs in distant Arabia. To harvest it, one must lay out enormous chunks of meat at the foot of the cliff. The birds swoop down, seize the meat, and drag it back to their nests. The nests, unable to bear the weight, come crashing to the ground. And then, if the hunter is fortunate enough not to be torn apart alive, he may gather the precious bark from the wreckage. European knights listened, crossed themselves, and paid any price asked. And the true source of cinnamon, the island of Ceylon, the Arabs concealed from Europe for nearly 2,000 years. Pepper, in the Middle Ages, became more than just a commodity. It became currency. Taxes were paid in it. Judges were bribed with it. In English law, a term was born, peppercorn rent, a symbolic payment of a single peppercorn per year. And this term, by the way, remains in British law to this very day. And then came the plague. The physicians of the 14th century were absolutely certain the Black Death was spread through miasma, foul, corrupted air, and therefore to be saved, one had to breathe in something noble, pungent, Eastern. Care to guess what suited the purpose best? The wealthy began wearing pomanders around their necks, delicate spheres of gold or silver packed with cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, and ambergris. Ladies pressed them to their faces as they crossed the market square. Spices had become a shield between man and the grave. And 3 centuries later, during the later plague outbreaks of the 17th century, this very same idea gave birth to what is, perhaps, the most recognizable image in the history of medicine. You have all seen this gentleman: a long black cloak, a wide-brimmed hat, and the beak. This is the medieval respirator, invented around the year 1619 by a French physician, Charles Delorme. Inside the beak, one would tightly pack cloves, mint, camphor, rose petals, and a vinegar-soaked sponge. The doctor would approach the patient and breathe through this aromatic cushion, devoutly believing that the noble aromas of the East would not permit the contagion to enter his lungs. Did it help? Not particularly. The plague, as we now know, was carried not through the air but by fleas upon rats, and yet the demand for cloves soared to the heavens. And now, players far greater than Arab merchants enter the game. The kings of Europe came to understand a simple truth: he who controls the spices controls everything. In the year 1498, Vasco da Gama rounded Africa and reached India. The cargo of pepper he brought back paid for the entire expedition 60 times over. Columbus missed his mark entirely and quite by accident stumbled upon an entire continent, America. Magellan perished while circumnavigating the globe. And all of this for the sake of reaching one tiny archipelago in the waters of Indonesia, the Moluccas, the Spice Islands. And it was here that the civilized Europeans revealed their true face. First came the Portuguese, and after them, the Dutch. And not merely the Dutch, but the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, founded in the year 1602, the first mega-corporation in the history of the world, with its own army, its own fleet, with the legal right to declare war and to execute men. Imagine, if you will, that Apple today possessed its own army and the right to hang its competitors. In the Moluccas, they established a regime of absolute terror. In the 17th century, the nutmeg tree grew in only one place on the entire planet, the tiny islands of Banda. In the year 1621, under the command of Governor Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, the Dutch carried out on the Banda Islands a genocide. Of 15,000 native inhabitants, roughly 1,000 remained alive. The rest were slaughtered, taken into slavery, or starved to death after their crops were destroyed. On the neighboring islands, the Dutch ordered every nutmeg and clove tree to be cut down, so that the spices would grow only under their control. If a local was caught secretly selling so much as a single seed, he was tortured and hanged. Entire villages were wiped out, on nothing more than suspicion. And every nutmeg that left the islands was first dipped in lime. The lime water killed the seed within, yet preserved the flavor. The monopoly held for more than 150 years, but monopolies always fall. And they are broken not by armies, but by botanist spies. It was shattered, as it happens, in the 1770s by a French botanist whose surname was Poivre, which translated from the French means pepper. Sometimes history does jest with a certain elegance. He secretly smuggled nutmeg and clove seedlings off the Dutch islands, transported them to the French colony of Mauritius, and planted them there. The monopoly collapsed. Spices began to be cultivated across the entire world. And by the end of the 18th century, pepper, clove, and nutmeg at last ceased to be treasures and became simply seasonings. But let us return to the 17th century, to the Dutch, and to a certain deal at which history is still, to this day, quietly chuckling. In the Moluccas, there was one tiny islet, no larger than a city park, called Run, overgrown with nutmeg trees from shore to shore, and the only island in the entire archipelago still held by the English. The Dutch wanted this island very, very badly, and in the year 1667, following the Second Anglo-Dutch War, a peace treaty was signed in the city of Breda. The Dutch diplomats approached their English colleagues and said, roughly, the following: "Gentlemen, give us this tiny little run of yours, and in exchange, we shall give you one distant, utterly worthless island. Nothing but mosquitoes and natives. Take it, we shan't miss it." The English thought it over and agreed, and so they received an island called Manhattan. Yes, my dear friends, the very same, the one upon which today stands New York. The age of the Great Spice Madness came to an end not because people had suddenly grown kinder. No, the pirates were simply replaced by a far more pragmatic sort of man, in white coats. In the 19th and 20th centuries, chemists learned to synthesize the principal aromas of spices directly in their laboratories. Why plunder tropical islands for vanilla if, in the year 1874, two German chemists discovered how to transform ordinary wood shavings into the very same thing? Today, roughly 85% of all the vanillin in the world is made not from an orchid, but from lignin, a waste product of the paper and pulp industry. Your vanilla ice cream, most probably, is a descendant of a pine log. Think about it, just for a moment. For centuries, the finest admirals of Europe drowned one another in the oceans. Entire civilizations were cut down to the root, and all of it, so that you and I today may lazily choose at the supermarket between paprika in cubes and paprika smoked. The world has become safer, food more predictable, and the stories have become a little less romantic. But you must admit, for our stomachs, it is, after all, rather better this way. Subscribe to the channel. We shall continue digging through the anatomy of human weaknesses together. I am Jasper Diggs, and the past is far more delicious than it seems.